Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Matthew Rhodes. I'm the Director of Programs in Central and Southeast Europe at the George C. Marshall Center. And it's my pleasure to officially welcome everyone to our two-day seminar on Euro-Atlantic security, a pre-Warsaw assessment. Before I give the floor to our three distinguished opening speakers, I just wanted to thank a few of the institutions and people involved in making this conference a reality. These start, of course, with the two co-sponsoring organizations of this seminar, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic and the Prague Institute of International Relations. Working together, we have collectively contributed a lot, and in addition to things like organizations of speakers and collaborations on the agenda for this conference, we of course owe the Ministry this spectacular venue that we'll be sitting in the next 2 days. I'd also like to recognize the U.S. and German embassies here in Prague. We'll be hearing from the ambassadors in a moment, but since the Marshall Center is a German-American partnership, we benefit in many ways from the local presence and knowledge of the diplomatic missions of our countries as well. To single out a couple of individuals, I would like to recognize a few of the people who did the practical work of putting on the conference. These include many people from the conference service of the International Institute of International Relations, Linda Begrova and Kristina Takinova in particular. These include Stanislava Bodenbender from the American Embassy, and these include two of my colleagues from the Marshall Center, Lieutenant Colonel Rainer Ritters and Lieutenant Stefan Marks, again, who have done hundreds of practical issues to make sure this went off. And finally, I'd like to, of course, thank in advance the speakers, moderators, and all of you as participants for making time in your schedule to be here. Excuse me, it's really your engagement that will make this seminar a success. I'm really glad to see around these long tables so many people from the Prague-based security community, as well as from elsewhere in Central Europe and beyond. I think it's a good example of the kind of exchange of views, the kind of effort to build common understanding of the security challenges we face that has been of such a part of the Marshall Center's mission for the last 20 years. So with that, let me turn then to our three distinguished speakers. We'll hear in turn from Ambassador Andrew Schapiro of the United States, from Ambassador Dr. Arndt Freiherr von Leeuwen from the Federal Republic of Germany, and from the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Security and Multilateral Issues of the Czech Republic, Jakub Kulhanek. So Ambassador Schapiro, please take the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. And I cannot think of a more interesting conference to have at a more interesting time. And whether interesting means good or bad is in the eyes of the beholder. But certainly this is an extremely topical and timely conference for us. I want to begin by thanking Dr. Rhodes. I want to welcome and thank the various Czech generals and members of the military who are here, the deputy ministers, fellow ambassadors, members of the Czech government, our colleagues from the Baltic countries and from the Visegrad Four. I want to welcome you all to Prague, and I want to thank you for inviting me to speak about the importance of our Euro-Atlantic relationship. I also want to make sure that everyone who needs earphones for the translating has them. Does everybody have? Great. Well, look, the Marshall Center, as I'm sure most of you know, is a great example of cooperation, largely between the United States and Germany, but it is named after General George C. Marshall, whose legacy and whose career, I think, is a great lesson for all of us today, because he was someone who understood the need for the use of military force, but he also understood that military force worked best when joined with statesmanship and diplomacy. He was a decorated, very accomplished general, but he was also a Secretary of State and a visionary diplomat. And we just marked last week a sad anniversary, the, I think, 68th anniversary of the coup that brought communists to power in this country. And one of the events that led up to that coup was Czech interest in joining the Marshall Plan. Of course, George Marshall is famous for having laid out his idea for a plan to rebuild Europe economically after World War II. And when Czechoslovakia expressed interest in joining the Marshall Plan, representatives of the Czech government were summoned to Moscow and told in no uncertain terms that that would not be tolerated. Now, why did the Soviets have such a negative and frightened reaction to the Marshall Plan? The reason was that in Stalin's view, economic integration with the West would weaken his hold on Eastern Europe. And unfortunately, I think we have seen with recent events in Ukraine something that is sadly similar. Whatever one may think of the Maidan, whatever interpretations people may place on the events leading up to the crisis in Ukraine, one thing is certain. The people of Ukraine made clear that they wanted closer integration with the West, and the Kremlin saw that as a threat. Now, we have shown, we collectively, the countries of the West, the countries of NATO, admirable collective resolve in the face of this new resurgent revanchist Russia, one that believes that spheres of influence should rule the day rather than self-determination. And I think that this has been a surprise to many observers, and certainly to many observers in Moscow. The fact that we are sitting here on February 29th, 2016, not only with sanctions still in place, not only with continued unity in our cause and in our resolve, but also with a renewed understanding of the purpose and value of NATO, with a renewed understanding and the need for energy security, with a renewed understanding of the importance of our partnership together. I think that has to come as a surprise to those who thought that by destabilizing and threatening Ukraine, they would also weaken our partnership. So I want to urge all of us and all of our countries to stay strong in the face of this threat, and to stay strong in the face of some other related threats, and obviously the topic that dominates the headlines today, and which I think in at least some small ways are tied to the larger struggles that we face, is the topic of migration. And I am confident that the countries of Europe can agree on a response that will address security and humanitarian concerns in a sustainable manner. And our country, the United States, is very supportive of those Europeans who are trying to ensure that legitimate refugees and asylum seekers can get to safety. We all absolutely recognize that states have legitimate concerns when it comes to safeguarding citizens from terrorism or other threats, and that the numbers of migrants that we're talking about are in the long run unsustainable. Too many migrants and refugees are taking the dangerous journeys to get to a better life. But we know that governments are capable of meeting their responsibility to keep their citizens secure, at the same time as providing refuge to some of the world's most vulnerable people. And I think that's important here because the alliance that we all represent is not just an alliance about military force or even about our interests, but also about our values. That is what we're fighting for and what we are protecting. And so to return for a moment to General Marshall, we have seen these days, certainly in the American press, I think in Europe as well, a suggestion sometimes that diplomacy is weakness and force is strength. And I think we need to reject that. The wise use of diplomacy can be strong, as we've seen through recent agreements with Iran, reopening of U.S. relations with Cuba, even the climate change agreement. But it also does need to be backed up by a serious defense alliance. And that's a large part of what you'll be talking about today and in Warsaw. Most importantly, I think it's important to remember that the world is not a safer place when we all turn inward. It is not better for the world if we refuse to be engaged. So this conference is, I think, a great example of that. I mentioned a moment ago that it's happening on February 29th, 2016, and as we watch history return with a vengeance to Europe, February 29th is a reminder that just because something doesn't happen often doesn't mean it won't happen again. And so we all need to be attuned to that. I wish you all a very successful conference, and I wish I could say the entire day because I know it's going to be a fascinating, fascinating day. Thank you.
Good morning, dear Mr. Rhodes, dear Andrew, dear Deputy Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to be here this morning and to have the opportunity to congratulate all of you who are taking part in what should be an extremely interesting seminar. Like my American colleague, I'm very proud to support this event and the other good work that the George C. Marshall Center, a unique German-American partnership based in my country, is carrying out. I know that several of you are graduates of various courses here, there. The mission of the George Marshall Center lays the foundation for mutual understanding and cooperation to foster peace and stability in a world that is challenged by multidimensional security threats. And the focus of your seminar during the next 2 years could not be more timely. Andrew, you called it interesting. We could say we live in turbulent times, to say the least. With the annexation of Crimea and the conflict in eastern Ukraine, the issue of war and peace has sadly returned to our continent, an issue that many thought was finally resolved in Europe. 1 year on, implementation of the Minsk II ceasefire agreement for Ukraine remains incomplete, and as I'm sure you know, Germany, my country, is heavily engaged in working towards a peaceful resolution of this conflict in the so-called Normandy format, in EU, in NATO, as well as in the OSCE. Meanwhile, violent unrest and bloody wars across the Middle East and North Africa have brought enormous suffering to millions of people. The civil war in Syria has claimed no less than 300,000 victims and a staggering 11 million refugees so far. It has also turned into a highly dangerous proxy war. It is our sincere hope that the present ceasefire will hold and open the way for political negotiations. But of course, we all know that this is likely to be a very long and difficult road. The terrorist attacks carried out in Paris and elsewhere were a horrific reminder of how violent extremism originating in the Middle East can also threaten the lives of citizens in the heart of Europe. And speaking of Europe, I cannot but express my concern about the state of the Union, in this case I mean the European Union, which is facing a multitude of severe crises at the same time presently. You all know what I'm talking about. The euro crisis is still not over. There is a discussion about a possible Brexit, and there is the refugee crisis that, Andrew, you have already spoken about. The latter is perhaps the one that goes deepest, because it is, yes, it is a humanitarian crisis. It continues to be one because constantly people are dying in the Mediterranean. It is also a crisis of European integration itself, since we are suddenly seeing that the Schengen system, one of the pillars and cornerstones of European integration, is at risk. And perhaps most of all, it is a moral crisis because solidarity between member states is at risk, and this is very worrying indeed, I think. So, and it has influences on all our discussion on security and peace in Europe, I would claim. This latter reason, the issue of solidarity within the European Union, I think that is the core reason why Chancellor Merkel is so much insisting on trying to find a European solution and not a national solution for the refugee crisis. And we do think that it's not too late for that, although things are very difficult, as we all know. All in all, I would not say that the Cold War has returned to Europe, as was mentioned at the recent Munich Security Conference, but one definitely has the feeling that elements of our old security order are unraveling, while we don't know yet how to stop these processes or what to replace the old order with. So, again, the seminar could not be more timely. You certainly have enough food for thought during this seminar. All the issues mentioned, they will also shape the agenda for our countries at NATO's upcoming summit in Warsaw, and they are also shaping our debates in the European Union. We, the NATO and EU members, we need to formulate coherent and comprehensive strategies in order to create a more stable security environment. This is only possible, and this will only be possible when we continue and intensify cooperation and dialogue. With respect to NATO, let me mention here that Germany highly appreciates the invitation of the Czech Republic to be special partner nation for the upcoming NATO days in Ostrava this year. We are very glad to accept this invitation because this special project offers a very good opportunity to publicly demonstrate our solidarity with our partners in Central Europe and in NATO and the European Union. Let me finally mention here the OSCE, which Germany chairs this year. During times of new uncertainty, times in which the ghosts of the past have come back to haunt us, we need an organization like the OSCE, and we want to use this organization to renew dialogue, rebuild trust, and restore security, as the motto of our chairman says. And these are our priorities for 2016. And let me say that we believe that not talking to each other during times of crisis cannot be the answer. We will not reach any good solutions this way, and we will not even manage to de-escalate conflicts. And we think the OSCE is an important venue for dialogue on security issues. Thank you very much to the George Marshall Center and to our Czech friends who serve as our hosts. Thank you, Dr. Rhodes, and thank you everybody else who has contributed to the organization of this interesting seminar. Thank you to all the participants who have come here. I wish you very good and fruitful discussions, also good networking, and thank you for your attention.
Well, good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me also welcome you all here in Prague on behalf of Czech Foreign Minister Lubomír Zaorálek. The Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs is particularly proud to host such an important conference. And I am myself quite honored to address this distinguished gathering of experts and practitioners. Unfortunately for me, I have the unenviable task of speaking last. And since most has been said in terms of welcoming remarks, let me limit myself to a few brief comments. But first I would like to respond to the announcement by the German ambassador that Germany will become a special nation partner for this year's NATO Days in Ostrava. NATO Days in Ostrava is one of the largest defense and security shows in Europe, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. And I'm confident that the participation of the German Air Force this year will make NATO Days even more successful, putting on display our cooperation within NATO, which is very relevant, especially these days. So thank you, Ambassador. But let me come back to why we are meeting here today. The NATO summit in Warsaw. Surely we can all agree that NATO's Warsaw summit will be an important milestone. Still, we are quite guilty of having said that about pretty much every other NATO summit. But where I suppose the true significance of the summit in Warsaw lies is in that one hopes it will confirm the path the 2014 NATO summit in Wales put the alliance on, the path towards a stronger collective defense and unity among NATO allies. Therefore, I believe the upcoming NATO summit is as much about bold visions as it is about the test of our resolve. It is therefore vital, as we prepare for the summit, to be clear about the security challenges we face and the outcomes we desire. Last night, when preparing for this conference, I was going through the report published by the Atlantic Council on the state of our alliance. After its release, the Alliance at Risk report has generated some controversy and media attention. The report offers little optimism and paints a rather bleak picture. The Atlantic Council's report is especially critical of what its authors consider rather inadequate capabilities of NATO's European allies and their ability to meet their defense commitments. I don't want to question the conclusions reached in this report. This, I suppose, might be a subject of discussion during later sessions today and tomorrow. However, I would like to offer some optimism here. The alliance faces a long-term period of uncertainty and threats coming from both state and non-state actors. But what fills me with some optimism is that the many recent trials and challenges have taught us a few valuable lessons, and we seem to have followed them. Especially among European allies, there is a growing realization that we cannot take our security for granted, and we have to invest in it. The decision by the Czech government to start increasing defense spending only testifies to this positive trend. Similarly, the scope and complexity of threats we face have made us realize that we can effectively address them only if we act together. This newly rediscovered sense of unity and togetherness is something we have to cherish and sustain. This provides us a solid foundation on which we can further strengthen NATO and thus contribute to strengthening our own security. The Warsaw Summit will form the basis for NATO's adaptation to the new hard realities of today's world. Inevitably, as we move closer to the summit, the discussion and debates we will have among allies will reflect differences in emphasis. This is inevitable. The risks we face can come from any direction and can take different forms, not only just militarily. Faced with the diversity and complexity of these risks, we in the Czech Republic believe that Warsaw Summit must demonstrate three things above all. First, that the alliance remains united based on the indispensable transatlantic link. This means demonstrating resolve and solidarity in the face of risks to our collective security, whether they come from the east, the south, or elsewhere. Secondly, the summit must show that the alliance has a clear and credible program of adaptation, which will deliver a real increase in defense and deterrence capabilities. And finally, the Czech Republic wants to see progress on NATO-EU cooperation. Be it hybrid warfare or crisis management, there is an ample room for cooperation between the two organizations. It is inconceivable that in any security crisis in today's Europe, NATO or the European Union would act separately or in isolation from each other. The European Union should further develop its security role to the point it can closely cooperate and coordinate with NATO. In conclusion, the transatlantic community today faces a new and dynamic security environment, dominated by many intractable challenges and threats. Just to name a few, a newly assertive Russia willing to use force to alter borders in Europe, violence and instability in the Middle East and North Africa, the rise of the Daesh, and last but not least, the migration crisis on a scale not seen since the end of the Second World War. However, the silver lining in this extremely challenging security environment is our renewed sense of unity and commitment to collective defense, and which we have been witnessing for quite some time. Thus, the summit in Warsaw will be an important test of NATO's continued resolve to bolster our defense capabilities. But certainly not trying to belittle its importance, and I would argue that the upcoming summit will be just a mere stop, however important, on the long journey the alliance has to undertake to maintain its relevance so it can do what it does best, making it possible for its members to pool their resources and defense capabilities to strengthen their security and that of the alliance as a whole. This is a joint endeavor to which each and every NATO member state has to contribute. I would now like to end these remarks by warmly thanking the US Marshall Center and the Czech Institute of International Relations for their hard work putting this seminar together. I wish you fruitful discussion and look forward to learning more about the conclusions of this conference. With that, I would like to open this conference by handing over to Ambassador Šedivý for his keynote address. Thank you.
Good morning, Excellencies, Mr. Deputy Minister, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I'm really glad to be here in this context of Marshall Center seminar. It's been now exactly 10 years since I was a member of the faculty, and I'm really glad to see some of my former colleagues, Matt, Ralph, Graham. I was asked to set the key for the topic of the conference, which is Euro-Atlantic security between two summits. And in my expose, I would like to review main issues that we in NATO have been working on over roughly the past 2 years. And it should be said from the outset that comparing the shape and spirit of the alliance then, i.e. February, March 2014, and now, it has been a sea change. And this change can be gripped in one word: acceleration. Acceleration of challenges, acceleration in our agendas and working tempo, acceleration of decision making and decision implementing, accelerated reactiveness, accelerated consultations and cooperation with partners, and so on and so forth. This new dynamism is cutting across all the three core NATO tasks, which is collective defense, crisis management and cooperative security. But above all, it is more evident in the context of the first and foremost one, the collective defense. Yet in the initial discussions about the Wales summit that we at NEC, North Atlantic Council, started towards the end of 2013, there were then serious doubts about even the very raison d'etre or necessity of having a summit. Concerns were about meager agenda. Afghanistan then was seen as the main topic, and indeed Afghanistan did not promise a big public diplomacy success. This changed very soon later. Russian annexation of Crimea and aggression against Ukraine in the east, and in the first month of 2014, and the fast growth of Daesh in the south throughout the year. This has transformed the security landscape and our threat assessment beyond recognition. Therefore, already in Wales in early September 2014, it was more than clear that NATO was facing the gravest set of security challenges, at least in a generation, and that this was becoming a new norm for many years to come. In the run-up to the Wales summit, the main strands of work in NATO included immediate reaction to the Russian challenge in terms of assurance measures for the eastern flank of NATO in the spirit of 28 allies for 28 allies. Preparations of the mid-term measures to enhance NATO's deterrence and defense posture, and those measures were summed up in the Readiness Action Plan. Finalizing the transition of our engagement in Afghanistan, which means closing down the ISAF operation after 13 years and establishing the Resolute Support Mission. And last but not least, intensified consultations with partners that in some cases resulted in substantively enhanced practical cooperation, especially with Ukraine, but also Georgia and Finland, Sweden. Needless to recall that NATO suspended all practical civilian and military cooperation with Russia, while at the same time offering Moscow to keep channels of political communication open. Yet our readiness to consider a political dialogue was and still is contingent on our seeing a clear and constructive change in Russia's behavior, as well as Moscow's compliance with international law and its international obligations and responsibilities. This position was confirmed by the heads of state and government in Wales. So then, the highlights of the Wales summit included approval of the Readiness Action Plan, which is actually the most important boost of the collective defense since the end of the Cold War. That is also a framework for a long-term adaptation of the alliance with political, military and institutional dimensions. Second, adoption of the Defense Investment Pledge as the fundamental prerequisite for meeting NATO's capability priorities. Third, tasking intensive work on countering challenges posed by hybrid warfare. Fourth, approving the transformation of NATO engagement in Afghanistan. And fifth, and again last but not least, in the area of partnerships, initiatives such as defense capacity building and the interoperability platform were established as new frameworks for intensifying cooperation with partners. If the Readiness Action Plan is the most visible element of Wales' conclusions, then NATO adaptation measures are the crucial moment of the RAP. These are longer-term changes to NATO political and decision-making process as well as force structure, with the aim to make the alliance better able to react swiftly and decisively to sudden crises whether these arise to the east or the south. They include areas such as the flexibility and agility of NATO crisis response system and acceleration of our decision-making process, improving the intelligence support, both in terms of situational awareness and capability to analyze, assess and anticipate potential crises, as well as national resilience building and civil preparedness enhancement. The most important of that is the military dimension of adaptation, which entails making NATO response force, NRF, more responsive and capable. The NRF has roughly doubled from the previous levels of about 20,000 troops, depending on the task if it is needed for. This will include land, sea, air and special forces components. At the same time, a new quick reaction spearhead force, the very high readiness joint task force or VJTF of around 5,000 ground troops supported by air, maritime and special forces is being created. This lead element will be able to start deploying in just 48 hours. The spearhead and NRF forces will be based in their home countries, but be able to deploy from there to wherever they are needed for exercises or reinforcement in crisis response or collective defense. Leadership and membership of the VJTF and NRF will rotate on an annual basis, and Germany and Netherlands and Norway established an interim spearhead force already in 2015. Czech Republic contributed in terms of 150 special operation force on helicopters. The full force is scheduled to stand up this year, and the operational capability of VJTF should be achieved before the Warsaw Summit. To support the reinforcement capability, small multinational NATO command and control posts on the territories of the Eastern Allies, which means Bulgaria, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia and Romania, manned on a rotational basis, are being established. These NATO force integration units or NFIUs are being staffed by national and NATO military specialists. Their task is to improve cooperation and coordination between NATO and national forces and prepare and support exercises and or any reinforcing deployments if needed. Further military measures include raising the readiness and capability of the headquarters multinational corps northeast in Szczecin in Poland and enhancing its role as a hub for regional cooperation and collective defense in the eastern direction. Pre-positioning military supplies on the territory of Eastern Allies is another one, improving NATO's ability to reinforce its Eastern Allies through preparations of host nation infrastructure such as airfields and ports, updating and specifying defense plans for Eastern Europe and keeping a training and exercise program up to the demanding level set by the Readiness Action Plan. So, as to the main deliverable to be brought to Warsaw, or in other words, what should be in place in time for the summit to be reviewed by the heads of states of government and to receive a further direction, it is above all the strengthened and adapted NATO deterrence and defense posture. This will require more robust and persistent military presence in the East and effective reinforcement capacity, in addition to the full implementation of the Readiness Action Plan. Related to that is a relatively new theme of building national resilience and civil preparedness in terms of an enabling or supporting framework for effective defense. Furthermore, and not directly REP-related agendas include NATO ballistic missile defense that should reach its initial operating capability before the summit, and we also discuss a cyber defense pledge or cyber defense commitment for Warsaw. And last but not least, the heads of state and government will take stock of the implementation of the defense investment pledge. As we follow a 360-degree or à tous azimuts approach in deterrence and defense, NATO does not ignore concerns of the southern flank allies. Warsaw should, in that respect, deliver a strategy countering challenges emanating from the south. The strategy will be followed by updating and specifying defense plans for southern allies in the similar way as we've been doing that for the east. This southern track also includes assurance measures for Turkey, increased situational awareness in the Mediterranean basin area, projecting stability to the southern partners, namely through defense capacity building initiative with partners such as Jordan or Iraq, and last but not least, strengthening political consultations and practical cooperation with international and regional organizations, particularly UN and the African Union. At the same time, we cannot avoid discussing the future of relations with Russia. Those discussions will be based on a comprehensive analysis of Russian foreign and defense policy, as well as Moscow's military posture that are underway. The heads of state and government may possibly recommend a way ahead in dealing with Russia, including in the area of enhancing transparency and risk management. As to Afghanistan, the summit will most probably extend the current resolute support mission into 2017. The situation on the ground is not conducive to closing down the mission as it was originally planned, and to establishing a new form of cooperation with the country in terms of an enduring partnership. And last but not least, the fact that despite all complexities, NATO door remains open should not be missed. This will be demonstrated by Montenegro sitting at the table in Warsaw already, though still in the capacity of an observer. But at the same time, it should be said that most probably no other of the partners candidates for membership should expect any breakthrough for their aspiration in Warsaw. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, in the beginning I mentioned the complex acceleration as the underlying or bottom line feature grasping NATO's evolution over the past 2 years. Then I tried to sketch the main issues and challenges that we face on the way from Wales to Warsaw. Inevitably, with this accelerated complexity comes also an acceleration in certain tensions amongst allies. But it should be also said that finding consensus on complex issues has always and inevitably been difficult and sometimes controversial balancing act in NATO. I would see four main balances to be struck in Warsaw if the summit is to be successful. First would be balance between East and South, or Eastern and Southern focus. Second, a balance between forward presence and reinforcement in the East. Third, balanced burden sharing in defense investment between the US and the rest, and fourth, balance between deterrence and dialogue concerning Russia. Now, the first two items seem to be reasonably well addressed and on track. As to the efforts to mitigate the burden sharing asymmetry between the US and the rest of the alliance, the defense investment pledge has delivered no tangible progress so far. On Russia, we have so far managed to keep fundamental unity, and this is very important. Yet, as the summit is approaching, debates about whether, and if so, how and to what extent, to square the imperative of enhanced deterrence on one hand with the growing demand for dialogue on the part of some allies, this is going to be a rather difficult discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm going to duck the obligatory optimistic spinning that customarily concludes official NATO speeches. We are living through the most challenging times since at least the end of the Cold War, as if the Euro-Atlantic security landscape has suffered from a series of earthquakes, all of them in the upper end of the Richter magnitude scale. The Alliance and the West at large have been hardly able to react adequately and effectively to all of these challenges. And this is indeed the bottom line of the problem, because the multiplicity of challenges, new threats and problems that individually would be solvable, but altogether they are posing a huge burden, and indeed the imperative of prioritization, which again leads back to difficult discussion not only in the alliance. So, in my view, Warsaw will be successful if the alliance emerges from the summit united and stabilized, but also stronger and fitter, so that NATO will then be able to shift from the current reactive mode of coping with security challenges as they come towards more proactive mode of shaping the Euro-Atlantic security, something what NATO used to be able doing very well in the past. With that, let me thank you for your attention. Thank you.